Oh, hold on. Got it. There's that recording. Hey, I am delighted to introduce my friend Tony Parlapiano, and most importantly, that is his real name. His name is Tony Parlapiano. So I know that that's one of the things that gets asked the most. But Tony is a freelance musician. He's a piano instructor, and he's the creator of this curriculum called popMATICS that he's going to be telling you about today. And you're going to love it. I know Tony as a friend. But if you're on the internet, if you've heard of that, and if you've heard of Facebook and you're in any of these piano groups, you probably have seen him. He's a very encouraging spirit, and he's great with students. I know this because I have referred students before to him, and their parents constantly contact me to tell me how much they have enjoyed working with him and how much of a spark he puts into them. So I'm really excited to have him here today and to introduce him. And so let's give him a warm Seattle Music Teachers Association welcome. And with that, we'll turn it over and hear all about popMATICS. Hey, Tony, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I was saying, as someone who my entire marketing strategy is just to do good work and hope that some people notice. And so every time I get the opportunity to do something like this, it's usually an invitation from a colleague, and I'm very grateful to be able to share this with you. So I will tell you a little bit about my program, popMATICS. This was kind of an accidental curriculum. I didn't really know I was developing until many pieces started coming together. It originally started with an adult student who was actually a former music teacher of mine in a different area other than piano. And he was very interested in learning how to play chords to support his voice. And I had a lot of materials, but all of it was pretty typical standard music notation. And I noticed that when we were working together, the music was kind of interfering with his connection through the instrument. So the first thing I did was I took the sheet music off the book, and we brought out notebooks and pencils, and we started trying to just reveal things at the speed of his understanding. So rather than getting overwhelmed with too many elements placed in front of him, we could just focus on one thing at a time. And I started coming up with more unique ways of presenting information to him. A lot of it happened through spreadsheets. I made a video one day, and I was talking about pop music and the math kind of behind it, between how certain chords function and work together. I threw out the name popMATICS, and someone was like, I like that name. And all of a sudden, I started putting all my materials together under that. I had just recently worked on kind of legitimizing my business by working with a designer and getting some professional materials. And when I pitched the idea to him, we came up with this. And so I've been working on it for maybe the last 4 years. And what I'm about to show you today is one of the first things that I created with popMATICS. And it's kind of the beginning of, I kind of put popMATICS into 6 lanes. And this is kind of the start of lane 6. So there's a lot of material that comes in before this. But I like that the way that this curriculum kind of started was with the vision at the end. And then over especially the last 2 years with being online, it's like I worked backwards. It was like I knew where we wanted to be, and then I tried to create the most efficient path and route to get us there. So I'm gonna share. Well, it's not really sharing screen. I'm just broadcasting. But this is the chart that I'd like to unpack today. And although this was one of the first concepts that I came up with for the curriculum, this presentation is fairly new. It's within the last year or so that I came up with this chart. Some of you may have seen something that's called the simple map. And I don't think I can share that at the moment, but there's this, someone designed this simple map with Roman numerals and showing where chords could lead. And they asked me what I thought of it, and I said, I think I could make a simpler one. So that's what I tried to do with this. And I'll get to it now. So you may have seen what I have on my sweatshirt here. This is kind of what was sent out in the email. And it's one of the things that people ask me about. What do those numbers on the back of your book mean? And so this triangle is gonna help us unpack that. And then this will be kind of the short form. So I decided to wear it today because I can only have so many things on the screen. The first thing I'll tell you is I don't use Roman numerals. I just use the standard Arabic symbols. And the reason that I do that is if you ask any child to close their eyes and you say the letter, or you say the number 4, and you ask them to write it down, they're not going to write down Roman numerals. So it's not that I don't think Roman numerals are important. We need to know what Super Bowl it is. Kids want to watch Star Wars in order, but for this type of shorthand chord symbol and sketching things out, I find it's much more efficient this way, and students can they instantly know what it is. There's not this extra layer that they kind of have to decode. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start at the vertices of the triangles, and at the very top here, I'm just going to write the 1. And over here, I'm going to write a 4. And over here, we're going to write a 5. And so these are our primary chords. And I'll do all my demonstrations in C for today. And the first thing that I have a student do, and again, there's prerequisites for this. They're already familiar with their major scales, their major chord scales. So this is, and also with their inversions by this point. So the first thing I have them do is I just want them to bounce around this triangle with this specific rhythm. Just 1, 4, 5, 1. And so we try those in the various different inversions. And then I also, they can do it any way they like. They can split it up. They can be more. They can add rhythm to it. They can do whatever they like, but it has to follow that formula of 1, 4, 5, 1. So this triangle is going to unpack what I call, it's the 9 most common chords that make up 90% of what we hear in 90% of pop tunes. This also on the top layer of this image on my shirt, it's the top layer of the stack. 1, 4, 5. There's going to be more of the primary chords than anything else when you're trying to unpack and figure out what's contained within a pop song. You're going to feel more of that. So we're going to build this out. We've got the nine circles here. The next one I'm going to bring in is going to be right here. 1/3. And over here, we're going to bring in a 5/7. So in this key, our 1 would be our C over the E, and our 5/7 would be our G over the B. And so one thing, when I'm teaching major scales, I like students to focus on the structure of what I call them blocks. They're tetrachords, but I call them blocks when they're building their blocks and recognizing the symmetrical structure of the first 4 notes and the last 4 notes with our half steps between 3 and 4 and 7 and 8. And I wanted to represent that in the same way on the triangle so that each side of the triangle would also be symmetrical with its structure. So what we're doing here now is on our way to 4, we're going to pass through the 1/3. And 5/7 back to 1. So this is the new rhythm we do. Quarter, quarter, half, quarter, quarter, half. And same thing, this is just showing that this is the tendency of those numbers. 3 has got this strong pull, it wants to pull to 4, and 7 has our strong pull, wanting to bring us back to 1. Now, if we go into the next unit here, we're going to draw a 4 over a 2. And this will be our 1/3. I'm sorry, 1/6. Now for these are a little different than what we had with our 1/3, where we just have the C major chord. We're just doubling one of the notes that we already have. With our 4/2, we're extending what would have been our normal D minor chord and getting this D minor 7. But I like this idea of stacking it in this way and having this shortcut in thinking when they're playing chords to accompany their voice, because for two reasons. That's kind of how they're going to separate it on the piano. They're gonna play the F chord on the top with the D in the bass. Also, if they ever get to the place where they're exploring jazz, they're already kind of used to detaching this root and thinking about the structure that's on the top of it. And so the same type of math is going on with the 1/6, where we're just extending the A minor and adding that 7. Now with minor chords, you can, in pop music in general, you can always add a 7th to a minor chord, and it's usually gonna enhance the sound. There's very few times where, you know, adding the 7th makes it too complicated and it just sounds like it just needs to be kind of a stock minor chord, in which case you just take the 4 away, you just play it as a straight 2. But really it's the same quality chord. I just call these variants. Whatever you add to these numbers, whether it's a suspension or an add 9, they're just variants on these numbers, because the primary thing I want students focusing on is identifying the bass note. And if they can listen for the bass line, then whatever the bass note is, these are the numbers that are most likely to come along with it. So when we look at this side of the triangle here, we notice it's 1 to 4 to 1 to 4. That right hand pattern there, this whole side of the triangle is just all 1s and 4s. When we get over to this side of the triangle, 5 to 1, 5 to 1. This entire side of the triangle is all 5s and 1s. So using just these 3 primary chords, moving over to the other side of the triangle, 5, 1, 5, 1. They can play their scale underneath. And that will create the 7 most common chords that we hear in popular styles of music. If you hear a 3 in the bass, the most likely scenario is that it's going to be a C over E chord. You hear a 7 in the bass, the most likely scenario it's going to be a G over B. So having our 1, 4, 5 as our primary and 2, 3, 6 as our secondary, what we're looking at with all these minor 7 chords are always just primary chords over a secondary root. Now I'm going to get rid of some of these arrows because I need to draw more and I don't want it to be too confusing. And I'm not sure if there's any questions at any point, I'm happy to take them as well. So moving from this, okay, so the next thing I would say is with students, once they play through these in those different ways, we start with the 3 chords, the 1, 4, 5, 1. And then we bring in that 1 over 3 and the 5 over 7. And then we fill in the 2 minor 7 chords. And from there, they could take, again, just the 3 primary chords in the right hand over these different bass notes. They can now just bounce around the triangle in any order at all. Take it to the 4, 1 over 6, 5 over 7, back to 1, over 3, to the 4, over 2, to the 5, back to 1. So we can set these up and have just really any option at all moving around this outer perimeter of the triangle. Now I'd like to get into the inside of the triangle. And that outer rim is what I call the primary chord scale, because again, it's using just the primary chords. When we get inside here, this is what we call the alternate roots. So in here, I'm going to have a 5 over 3. And again, I'm using that red number at the top because this is more of a shortcut in the way that we think about the chord. It's really just a 3 minor 7, but we're going to have that G quality, that G chord with that 3 in the bass. So here we got our E minor 7, the G on the top. And so this one is a little, it functions a little differently than what's on the inside of the track, where to me, the 5/3, it needs to kind of go either back to a 1 or a 4 before it sets up to the 5. The reason mainly being is there's just too much in common with those two, because when you're on this one, it's got to move to something else that's either on that side of the triangle, either to the 4/2 before it sets up the 5. It could also go to the 6. Moving it back. So that's one of our other alternate routes. And then the one in the middle here is going to be our 4/5, which is going to be our F/G. Now, you may see that written sometimes as F/G. It's probably more common that you'll see it written as a G7 sus4. But really, whenever you see that, a dominant sus chord, this is the qualities within it, the 4/5. I call it the James Taylor chords, like in every single one of the songs. And this one has the strongest pull, just like to me, this is the pop dominant 7. You really don't get, in standard pop tunes, you don't really get the dominant 7. It's usually either going to be a clean 5 or it's going to be a 4/5 coming back down. But the way that I had this set up was I wanted this 4/5 to have this strong point back to 1. So we see that this triangle is pointing us right back to 1. So wherever you are, when you jump into the 4/5, it's got that strong pull. It wants to come back to 1. Now we also have the triangle pointing. The other vertices here are pointing to the 1/3 and the 1/6. So they're pointing to all the different chords that use 1 as the top part of the structure, as the top part of the stack. So in the same way, when you get to that 4/5, I could go to the 1/3. It just feels like it's got to keep going, moving back through. Same thing, we could resolve it to the 1/6. So those are the major components of the primary chord scale with the alternate roots. And of course, we can take these to any key. And that's why I like to start by teaching in numbers before starting with the letters, because I see sometimes we know the chords, but we're not necessarily thinking about the relationship that they have to the key that they're in. And so when this occurs, like a lot of people will teach what they call the 4 chords of pop. And they'll start in that very first lesson and they'll show them the C chord, the G chord, the A minor, and the F, without really having any awareness that we're moving from 1, 5, 6, 4, that it's a 15/64 in this particular key. And I think the most important part of this is having the awareness of where we are in relationship to the key and being able to hear things with it as numbers, because there's really just one number system. And so when we're listening to music in the car or anything, you can start to hear the movement. As you get more familiar with the 9 chords that work within this structure, it becomes much easier to identify when something falls outside of this structure. And then once you discover what that is, it takes on a much stronger identity. So I really do feel I've been teaching this style of music for about 15 years. And I know I give myself a lot of outs when I say this, but these really are, from everything I've explored, these are the 9 chords that make up about 90% of what we hear in 90% of pop songs. Now, if I take this out, I will take it a little step further and talk about 4 more chords that could take you even further. And these are the 4 most common chords that come from outside of the key. And in popMATICS, I call these flip tonalities. So anytime you have a major chord that functions normally as a major chord and it turns minor, or a minor chord that turns major, this is what I call flip tonalities. So it's very common that you might hear a 2 major, you could hear a 3 major, you could hear a 4 minor, or you could hear a flat 7. And so I'll give an example of the 2 major. Maybe you're descending down the primary chord scale. Here's the 2 major, back to 5, and to 1. So that would be an example there. The 3 major usually takes us to the 6th chord, to the 1/6. 4 minors are extremely popular right now in songs. We're hearing lots of 4 minors coming out in pop songs. I mean, this isn't anything new. The Beatles have been doing this since forever. They gave us a lot of these lessons, but that's the that's another one. And then the flat 7, which is borrowed from the 4. And so if you add in those chords, you're actually getting quite a bit further into, well beyond the 90% range. And then again, as students begin to unpack other things, as they discover these other things, they become such a strong identity that they're much more likely to recognize when it shows up in another song. And so I'll just mention that with my approach, I like to have, I call this like a concept-based music curriculum, because I don't like picking songs for my students. To me, the music that we listen to, they remind us of so many experiences and memories. I have so many songs that I listen to that I can instantly be brought back to my childhood. And I really feel that in the same way that music can protect our memories, they can also kind of protect the learning experience for a student. So when they learn something new within a song that they already know and love, they're much more likely to carry that with them. And so with my materials, I like to focus mostly on the concepts and trying to present information in what I hope is an interesting way, in a unique way, that it'll be preserved through what they're learning, the songs that they're choosing. So I'll just ask, with less than 10 minutes left, does anybody have any questions, or would you like me to? I can carry on with some other things.
I have one.
Yeah.
On your 2 major, 3 major, and 4 major, you wrote those on that side next to those circles. Is that to represent that they can substitute those circles?
No, I'm sorry. Yeah. So great question. Not substitution in the way that it's like an equal exchange, like anytime you would go there, but more so that when we're looking at the side of the triangle here, this path, this is following where we're going 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. So meaning like there's the 7 numbers that go around. So I just put them on the outside. It's not necessarily that it would always substitute for that chord, but just meaning that that's the location. That's the second circle on the track. This is the 3rd circle on the track. And again, that's usually something I don't, it's not part of this presentation. I just realized that I went through that a little quicker than I thought. And so I figured I'd throw you guys the 4 chords from outside the key as well.
All right, and then one more was, can you go through your second pattern again where you jumped from 1 to 3?
Yeah.
What was the rhythm on that one?
So with that one, I use quarter, 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 half for that one, and yeah, that's it. I think Clinton threw me a question, which I get asked quite a bit. What about your minor keys? And this is where it's a great question. I tend to think a little differently about modes and minor keys. And in popular styles of music, a lot of times if a song starts where it feels centered around the minor, by the time it gets to the chorus or the bridge, it's turned into that. It's usually connected. I don't really consider if it starts where it's kind of centered around A minor, but eventually the chorus or bridge, it goes into the key of C, then I just treat that all as one. So the way that I look at it is I will use this same number system most of the time, even if it's going to be in a minor key. I'm just going to write that as a 1/6 for that. So it really depends on the song. Like certain examples, sometimes if it's a minor key, then I will end up writing, for number system, it's going to be 1. I'll just write 1 minor or 4 minor or whatever it needs to be. I just choose I'll just change the symbol along with it to go with it. But I don't have a whole separate number system for minor keys. I wouldn't rename A minor as like a 1 by itself. It would have to be a 1 with a little m if I was going through it that way.
So what about some of the chords that are like, for example, 4/5, like minor over G, you'd get the minor 9th, right?
Say that one more time.
I mean, like not all the chords would act the same, right? If you made that F minor.
If I did that, you mean?
Oh, well, you changed the D, that changed it.
Oh yeah, you could do it here too, though.
Yeah.
Right? You'd get the flat 9. Yep.
But is it? Okay. Well,
Yeah, you could.
but you're resolving to the major. Would it work to resolve to the minor?
Go. Oh.
It's a little.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it functions as like a plagal chord, right? I mean,
I'll be honest, that's getting beyond even what I know. I don't have the classical theory background. Like, so when you say plagal chord, I'm not sure what.
Oh, sorry, 4/1.
4/1. Okay.
Yeah, like minor 4/1 is like a
minor
plagal, or the flat 7/1 functions like that too. But yeah, so it works.
Yeah.
Huh. So that 4 could probably be substituted in the major key as a minor 4 as well, and 4/5.
Yeah, it's possible. If I had more time, I would take you through a demonstration that I have that's called Area 51. And when I'm working, I'll try to do this in 90 seconds as much as I can. So in Area 51, what I do is I take the 5 and the 1 of a key, and I play them against every bass note. And I have a series of, there's like 5 sequence progressions. So this 51, the properties of 51 blend so well with all of the notes that are within the key. But they also work extremely well with anything that's from outside of the key. Anytime you take any of these, I call those, they're kind of like the storm notes. When you're inside the key, everything's like clear blue skies. Everything works together. When you start bringing in the notes from outside the key, those, I call those kind of the storm notes. They bring in a little tension. They all work, but they have the natural tendency to want to resolve to the closest, what I call the primary stations, 1, 4, and 5. So when I hit that flat 7, I want to bring it to 1. Flat 6 wants to go to 5. Flat 3 wants to go to 4. Flat 2 to 1. If you get the sharp or you got the strongest amount of tension, it could go either way. I usually bring it down to the 4. So I have I would have to put together, I would really have to plan a presentation to try to explain my relationship with minor in a way that would help. But when I'm writing a minor song out, and I'd have to grab an example, I relate a lot of it to this idea of being inside the storm. And so I'll use all of those things like the flat 3. I wouldn't call, if I was writing this out in minor, I'm going to think of E flat as a flat 3. I'm not just going to think of it as the 3.
Oh.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh. Okay.
So it's like it's everything stems. It's for me it's like Disney and Pixar. It's like Pixar is its own company. They get to do their own things. They have a different way that they like to make movies, but it's all under this like parent company. And so I just see minor called the relative keys. So I see it as the relationship to the major key. So I'm always looking, when something's in minor, I don't treat it as its own individual thing. I look at the difference between what it would be if it was under the major key. So everything gets written out in a numeric system. Things would get written as flat 3, flat 6, flat 7.
Okay. Would those resolve the same way? Like, could you go from 1 to 4/2 or D half diminished? Or,
well,
as 4/2 in minor would be
right.
D
minor 7 flat 5. Is
yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
No. Yeah. So yeah.
Would that resolve to E flat 6?
To an E flat 6?
Because that was 1/3.
Yeah.
Wait, play that.
Is this what you're saying?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking at your.
Yeah. So yeah, you're like this chart. This chart is intended for major keys. If you had songs like an example in minor, and I were to listen to it, I wouldn't necessarily use this chart.
Got it. Okay.
Try to explain a song that's minor, but we would use what we've learned from this chart, so it doesn't necessarily map the same flow.
Okay. So it would be it would flow differently.
Yeah, but again,
but
what's that?
The chords would work. They would be the right chords.
You're right. Yeah, if you did 4/2, if you were in minor, and I've been asked
that would be
before, like, yeah, if I was here and I went 4/2, yeah, it's gonna work. It's still the same thing. But I know I'm coming from a different background, but to me that adds a layer of complexity that I can't entirely wrap my head around. What's that?
Yeah. Oh, I'm not from a classical background either. So
yeah. Yeah, I understand that when you see a minor 7 flat 5, that's a 2 in a minor key, and I understand how all that functions. But from the
Great.
Like in a lot, I would say like most of the pop songs that I find, usually if it's in a minor key and it stays in the minor key throughout the entire song, generally I find that they're usually fairly simplified songs where it's like just a few like Spooky from the classics, it's like a 3-chord jam in a minor key. But most of the things, like if I'm listening to a song by Adele that a lot of people might say starts in a minor key, well, if it modulates to the relative major, then I write the whole thing as if it's in major.
Right.
And
so it would be starting on 6 or something.
Exactly. Yeah, it'd be starting on 1/6. I wouldn't say it's starting on 1, even if that's the tonal center. If that makes sense. And the one thing I should maybe specify is that what I'm doing here with what I call number system is a little bit different than analysis, where sometimes the two can be in harmony, and the idea of 1 moving to 4 or 5, like everything can be represented by the same number. But when I'm writing things like 1/3 or 4/5, this is kind of more in line with what you see in Nashville number system. I will say a lot of my background in history has been learning from guitar teacher or guitar players. And I think this is, I could be wrong about this too, but I think a lot of guitar players tend to think mostly in major keys. I know one of the popular apps that I use for virtual keyboard and chord analysis, it's called Chordy. And when you go to select your key in there, they only have drop downs of major keys. So it's just it's a different way of thinking of it for sure. But I have a kind of a similar relationship with even the modes too. Like I don't if a song's in what I guess they would say Dorian, in my head I still think of this almost like you have your key of C, but the tonal center is shifted. I like the coming up with like the 7 different names for the same series of notes, because to me you don't really get the feel of the mode unless, this is just me, you know, with the experience that I have, you don't really get the sound of the mode unless you're playing the scale in order. If you play everything out of order, you know, I don't until you get the context of the key, or until the harmony supplies the context, I have really no idea what the tonal center is going to be, if that makes sense.
Tony, I have another question. Your
Sure.
books, if we wanted to use this method in a studio, do we want to get one book per student, or does the e-composition book download work for a studio?
Oh, the download. If you downloaded the book, you can use it for the whole studio.
Okay, perfect.
For any students that you directly teach. Yeah, I don't have a separation between a single license or like a studio license or anything like that.
Okay,
But I will say that the book is not a comprehensive. I wouldn't recommend buying the book. If anybody would like a copy of these charts, and I have the completed version too, where it's just the numbers are there. That was kind of the fill-in worksheet where I like to just reveal it one step at a time rather than putting all the information out there all at once. But the digital one has all those fill-in worksheets along with it, but it's not something, there's not instruction, it's not detailed instructions on like how to teach it. But if anybody wants I'm happy to share the file that I used today if anybody wants it to just have for their own.
Perfect, thanks.
So I think I missed the beginning a little, so I'm sorry if I'm asking something that you already said.
Okay.
But so then so the system's really cool. So then when my kid comes in and they're like, I want to play Shake It Off, right? And then how do you apply this system to getting the kid to play the pop song that they want to be able to play?
So
I'm sorry if I missed that part.
No, it depends on the desired outcome. If their goal is to do some type of piano arrangement where they're playing the melody and supplying the harmony, that's a little different. What I shared here, this is more in line with if someone's going to want to play chords and sing along to it. And I have examples of that, but I think I'm not like it's I can't share it, I don't think, during the meeting because it's copyrighted stuff or examples of songs.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
But what that is usually it's like a lyric and chord sheet, and then here I could actually share. I'll show you what.
Like something you'd find on Ultimate Guitar. That or
similar. Well, what I can show, yeah, exactly. It's like lyrics with chord symbols. I don't know if that's so I'll show you, but I can show you this here. So I usually have here a listing of the chords that would go here, and that on the other side we have the lyrics of the song, the chord symbols above it, and then I have this chart over to the side where they can look through and they can see, okay, this song contains a 1, 2, 4, 5, and a 6 chord. There's no 3 chords in it. They can see the context if they want to turn these minor chords into minor 7 chords. So this is kind of something that we go through, and they have all of their all of the things that are going to show up inside of the song. So this song happens to have a lot of things that are showing up outside of the key. It has a 3 major, a 4 minor, flat 3, flat 6, flat 7, because this one's kind of shifting between like it's starting in the major key and then shifting to the parallel minor. So again, when I'm writing it out, I'm going to I write those as flat 3, flat 6, flat 7, rather than reorganizing it as like saying, okay, now we're stopping here, and now we're going to start writing numbers in major, because that's the difference a little bit between, if you're analyzing the piece, it's one thing to talk about, okay, we're on the 1 in a minor key. But if you're doing this kind of from a short form in the style that you would get with, say, like a Nashville number system style of playing, there, it's just the numbers are kind of at the face value of what they are. The 1, 4, 5 are always going to be related to major keys. 2, 3, 6 are always going to be minor. And if you want them to be different from that, you have to indicate that some way by either writing a little m if it's on a 4, or a big M if it's on one of the minor chords.
Cool. And so then this system, it looks kind of like a lead sheet, like they get the words and then
yeah, exactly.
Or,
yeah,
not a lead sheet, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's just lyrics and then chords, and
Okay.
you can see examples of that like on my YouTube channel. I have some examples of what something like that looks like. But yeah, you could get them off Ultimate Guitar or things like that. They I don't know the different websites. We usually end up making our own versions of them, just because we want to. I mean, that's part of my process. Is I don't like starting with all the answers already in place. I'd rather start with, all my students keep music journals. We use composition notebooks and then manuscript paper when we need that as well.
Yeah.
Do
they just work out the melody by ear?
The melody? Yeah, we usually track the melody by ear. So this let me see if I can give you an example of this. So if they're going to play a melody, we can do, let's see, would be a good example here. So if I'm in a composition book and I'm working with a student, it might look something like this, and where we actually take the lines of the composition book, we darken them in, we draw a staff. And then we will actually write the letters exactly where they would be on a staff when we're learning it. Now you see a lot of different things in here, like I have a star. These are all symbols that are from earlier things. So we'll work out a melody like this. If we need to, we'll write the lyrics. And again, this is just kind of a sketched process if we're learning it. Then from here we would go and we would take it to standard notation. But this is, the standard notation for me always comes at the end. It comes at the end of the learning process. This becomes kind of the initial sketch. We'll listen to the song and we'll try to pick out the melody, sing it back, and then we use various symbols, and like I use these little things to hear the sound of a swing. When we start on a note, we dip down and we return to it. And then we kind of make loose notes about where the chord symbols will fall, the chord changes. So even with just playing a single note melody and playing these bass notes kind of as the canvas for the melody, they can get that sense of it. But yeah, that's what I would do if I was starting with like a piano arrangement. And then from here we would build it out. But we always start with those two elements, the bass and the melody. Yeah, I know it's a little wild, like this process, but it stems from listening first. We always listen, we try to identify the key, and then we'll pick out the melodies, and then we'll write them. But I like, if we're gonna write them out, I want to at least write them in kind of using the manuscript paper, or using the ruled paper as manuscript paper, and at least putting the notes where they would be, so they get the idea of where the location is. And then they don't need to focus too much on the rhythm because it's going to be a song that they've picked out. They already know the rhythm. So this is just really a little reminder of what we've kind of uncovered during the lesson.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you're using chord symbols here. So you wouldn't use like, so would you use the numbers or the chord symbols when you're writing it out like this generally?
So if I'm going purely from listening, when we go from listening, we'll start with number system. So a lot of the exercises, like the Area 51 exercises, a lot of those will start. Here, I'll show you. Let's see if I have the, here it is. Here would be a good example. So this is for the number system essentials. Here, the number system is going to work for any key. So I'll start by just putting in the key that we would use. And then underneath each of these, they'll go and they'll make their conversions. So the one's going to be a C, F, G, F, C. If we go to the next line, the one's going to be a C, C over E. So I want them thinking in the numbers first. But once they get past that, then once we're inside the key, we can start converting those letters to numbers. But I want them to be able to, again, the letters are going to come later because I want them to be able to hear the movement between the numbers first, and so that they could be in the car listening to the music and kind of know exactly what's going on. Once they get home, they just have to figure out which key it's in, and then they can convert all those numbers into letters. So if they're sketching something out, when I'm hearing music, I'm like, oh, this is a 1, this is going to a 1 over 3, this is going to a 4, this is going to a 1 over 6. We'll sketch it out like that initially, and then we'll make all those conversions. Because a lot of times we're trying to do it before we even know what key we're in.
Great. So what kind of student, like, is it a student with a little bit of experience that you would start this sort of method with? Or like, 6-year-old comes to you day one, what would you do?
6-year-old comes to me day one.
And really want to play pop music.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, if you want a day one activity, one of the first things I do.
Oh.
What's that?
Oh, nothing. It doesn't have to be super specific. Just an idea work for. Like, yeah. What is the?
Yeah. So this is pretty far into the curriculum, like doing all this stuff. So this is not day one stuff. If I was going to show you a set list, so this would be lane 1, all of this stuff right here. After that, they get into Area 51. Here's where they start getting into triads.
Okay.
Major chord scales. This is inversions, and then like this is kind of like what I was talking to you about today.
Right. So that comes far into the game.
Yeah, they've already learned. They've already learned. I think the first thing that I do is I teach like that's related to chords. Is I'll teach students something that I call the primary stations, and so they're learning. I'll sustain this. So 1 4. So they're playing 1 4 5 going up, and we try that in different spots. And we'll wherever they go. So they try to find all the sounds of the 1 4 5 within a key.
Mm-hmm.
From there, we'll lay down a canvas. And they'll improvise with the primary stations, and then I call it the resolution. Once they play the primary station, they resolve the 4. So this is the sound. This is an activity that they go through, learning them in all the keys. So they're kind of learning all their major chords before we've even given them a name or talked about it, just through the sound. And then later into the curriculum, they'll get into unpacking all that. And then, yeah, I figured going through, maybe that could have been even, I don't know, that might have been even more interesting too, talking about the early stages getting into it, but I figured since I'm talking with teachers who have probably a lot of this information already, but maybe not through like this kind of presentation or this kind of lens of thinking of it differently in terms of like chord stacks, that this would be this would work. But yeah, they've already gone through a lot, and this whole anchors and cradles section is where they get really familiar with different inversions. So by the time we're even getting to this primary chord scale and learning about stacking chords, they've already got all the basic triads in their 3 positions.
Got it. That makes sense. I was trying to apply it in my brain to some of my students and thinking like, oh, this would be like a lot for them.
Oh yeah. Well, I will tell you, I have, there's I made a YouTube playlist, and the first 22 lessons in this units, the first 22 lessons I did every day of the week from the Monday after Christmas. I made a video with detailed text and an image. And so every single one of the lessons in units here, these 22 lessons, there's a YouTube video and it's in a playlist. And I'm happy to share that with anybody who's interested in seeing it. And that'll really help you unpack how I approach beginning lessons with students. And I would say that there's 52 concepts total on this entire set list, but each of those, several layers between each of them, and kind of the fun part is combining multiple concepts and going together. But the whole units thing, I think I've been sharing that kind of a lot recently in my group, in the Facebook group. And this unit section, it's almost all of that was created in March 2020 on. Like this is all like newer stuff, because that was the first time that I started working with students online, like younger students. From that point on, it used to be only students that had finished high school and were going on to college and wanted to keep their lessons going, or people that had 5+ years experience. So that's why I always had that, the more challenging, more advanced stuff. But yeah, there's a whole lot that goes in before we get there.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Well, I was just saying in chat that this is really mind-blowing, but I'm a violin and viola teacher. But I would really love to, kind of had more time to absorb this. And so if you could put your, URL and your YouTube channel in the chat, or your email, whatever you prefer, that would be really great.
I'll drop the units playlist right in there. And yeah, 2 years of being on Zoom every day, and I forgot that we have a chat feature. Hang on a second. Okay, so in the playlist that I'm sending, right here, the units playlist, if you go into the description of each video, there's detailed text on the lesson. So pretty much exactly how I would maybe break it down. It's not really a script for the videos, although you may hear me repeat a lot of the same things, because I did this every day for 22 days. I woke up each morning and I created the visual for it. I wrote the text, and then I made kind of a low budget film for it. So it was just kind of like single cam over my piano. At some point I'm going to enhance the video production maybe to something a little bit more like what I did today, this type of presentation. But each of the lessons will have video demonstrations, so you can walk it through. And the nice thing about this to me is that anything that you stumble upon in units, and I tried to get through the entire units thing without using any letter names. I never called any of the notes C, D, F, but they get a lot of location-based activities still through that. But I like that it shouldn't interfere with any other primary curriculums that you're doing. These would just be little activities that could enhance what you're doing, little creative activities, and at the same time still teach them a lot about structure and the fundamentals of piano.
Cool. Thank you, Tony. Does anybody have any questions for Tony? Any other questions?
I really like the idea of your older student who wanted to learn Amazing Grace.
Yeah.
I imagining, you know, you could play Amazing Grace with all major chords, but then introducing her to the minor, you know, without having to say it's a substitution or anything like that, worked really well.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank
Cool.
you. I like that's usually what the holiday songs are great for too. Is, you know, a lot of students will pick their favorite holiday song, and it's something that we can return to every year and see, can we make how can we do a slightly more enhanced version of this? It's okay to play the same song for years and just keep developing it.
Tony,
rather
can
than-
I, you know, can I pipe in really quick just as a guitar
Yeah,
player?
Sure.
You know, I thought this was really interesting because this is and you, something you said at the beginning when you're like, oh, I don't use Roman numerals, which I do use Roman numerals, but as soon as you said that, I was like, you're teaching wise, you're pulling out a piece of friction, right? That is, we're trying to teach people that don't know something, you're just trying to make it more simple and graspable.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, and guitar has been taught this way for a really long time. Like there's classical guitar, which is one thing, but like most of pop guitar is taught in a similar style and uses the similar type chords. But the
Yep.
real value to it over time, aside from access, is that like I love, for me, my goal is my students to be able to like hear something and understand tonal center. And like, you know, we often teach it like kind of Beatles harmony, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they use all these things so well. It's being like, this is the textbook. And so when they're sitting in a car, right, they start putting these correlations together where they think of it structurally, right? And so as you were teaching this, I was kind of envisioning it in a guitar world, and it meshes in a really cool way. And I hadn't thought about the way you had those inversions and those slash chords, but they're, you know, they're so prevalent. It's a really, I'm looking forward to trying to squish that together and adjust it into my teaching. So thanks.
Yeah. And you know, the last thing I should mention here before I, you know, that I didn't do, hang on one moment. Let me get because I promised to make sense of the chart that I sent you. And then here I am not even really making that connection. Let me just throw this up real quick. So when you saw that poster, this is kind of my shorthand for it, is when I tell them I write the 136-2457, I tell them to remember that with like phone number rhythm, 136-2457. And so it's the one chord that goes with all of those bass notes. And as we get over here, we have the 4 chord over the 2 and the 4. And the 5 over the 5 and the 7. Back. And then those 2 numbers underneath, our 5 and our 3, those were the alternate roots. It's the 4 over the 5 and the 5 over the 3. It's kind of the inside layer of the track. But a lot of times students and I will kind of write that diagram out, that symbol out on there at the top of their page. And we know that when we identify the bass line, because the bass gives us the most information about the harmony that's in place, when we hear that 6 chord, when we hear that 6 in the bass, we know that that's our most likely option to go with it in the right hand. So that's kind of the idea around it.
Yeah, because in pop, the 7's going to never be the half diminished chord. It's always going to be that G/B, right? Or right?
Yeah, never. Right. 100. Like, yeah, that's what I said to someone. I said if you get a diminished chord, it's only because it's the top part of a G7 chord. Or it's the top part of the dominant. You're never gonna see the 7 function as a 7 in that way. It's just going to be connected to something else. And you know, it's really nice because you can bring a lot of these in. You can say things like the 6 over sharp 4 to get these other little diminished chords. And so you can start stacking just these basic stock triads and mixing them with a lot of the other chords. You get a 5 minor over flat 3 to get the major 7 chord. So there's all kinds of ways to get apart this idea of that, instead of thinking of chords only from the root stacking up and all the extensions, it's like, what if you have this, but then you dig underneath and you put something below it? Now it's kind of pushing everything out, if that makes sense.
It's awesome.
So you can build them from both directions.
Do you think you'll ever make a jazz one?
The Jazzmatics one. So yeah, like what I would, yeah, I'll save that for someone else probably. I'm a student of jazz myself, and I enjoy thinking about it. And for me, I still meet twice a month with one of my former college professors, who's, I mean, that's his thing, reharmonization, jazz reharmonization. And you know, he's when he sees some of my stuff, he says, well, I don't know about that, when he was talking about the chords. And I said, the reason I like this stacking idea is that whenever we see things in jazz, you're most of the time when you're playing your voicings in jazz, you're not going to have the root in there anyway. You want to get used to the root, detaching the root. So this idea of having the structure on top, and that's the other thing too. It's like whatever you can do to a 4 chord, you can do to a 4/2. You can, if you want to add a 9, add the 9 and put it over the 2. Now it's an 11. You want to add the major 7. Now it's the 9. It just keeps pushing it out one more. So without having to think of, there's just so much chord information. Like looking at all these chords and trying to figure out what they all are. It's wonderful to get there, but I think that this idea of finding just basic triads and mixing them with different root tones as an extension of what I shared with the Area 51, how that can even work with all the notes outside the key. It's a way to explore it without all that theory getting kind of in the way at that initial stage of just exploring. And then you just tell them what it all means later. You know, you can, these are all the big names for it, but I don't want to start with that. I just want to start with the exploration and the playing.
Yeah, starting with the listening.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Tony. This has been fun. Yeah. Cool.
Tony, what's your website? What's is it popMATICS or?
If you did that, if you did popMATICS.com, it would take you there.
Okay.
Parlapiano Studio is my website, but if you just write popMATICS, it would take you there.
Okay.
I'll be honest, there's not a whole lot there. I do have, there's a Facebook group where I share a lot of, it's called popMATICS 101. You're welcome to join if you want to see more of my stuff there. That's where I shared a lot of the lessons that are in that playlist there. But once I had those all together, I wanted to make sure I had them in a type of playlist where people could just go through them in order.
Cool. Okay, can we do a virtual round of applause for
Thank you.
Woohoo.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. I think we're all good for today. If anybody wants to stick around